to Michigan, in fact, and talked to Yusuf Mauri, who's an award-winning documentary filmmaker, journalist, and Yemeni American, but unable, I think, to travel to Yemen for a variety of reasons. Let's hear from Yusuf.
You're welcome.
Yusuf, in your understanding, are these allegations in this report true?
Of course they're true. In fact, the British troops have existed in Al-Mahra province since 2018. This is nothing new. British and Saudi troops have existed in Al-Mahra province since 2018 for a number of reasons that they will not tell you about. One of those main reasons that the British troops exist in Al-Mahra is because, first and foremost, they want to secure the Saudi oil pipeline that stretches from Saudi borders through the district of Al-Mahra into the Arabian Sea. That's one reason, but that's not the main reason. One of the main reasons for these foreign troops existing in Yemen is because they actually want to establish permanent military bases and military airfields all around Yemen, just as the UK and US government did in Afghanistan and did in Iraq. And the strategy here seems to be they want to establish these military bases all around Yemeni coastal lines and on Yemeni islands. These military manifestations, as we see, are in the island of Socotra, in the island of El Mayoun, where the UAE and the British government is establishing a military airfield. And as we know, the UAE government is establishing and is occupying the island of Socotra. And what I think this is in preparation for is an all-out war on Yemen from all four corners by a NATO-like alliance consisting of US, UK, and other Western troops, along with their Saudi, UAE, Arab allies. And I think their plan in the near future is to attack Yemen from all corners, and they want to use these military bases that they're establishing in the east, west, north, south of Yemen to attack the Ansar Allah-backed government stationed in Sana'a. And of course, the goal here is to restore the Hadi-backed government into power in order to maintain US and Western interest over Yemen land.
You mentioned our bases in Afghanistan and Iraq, but these were run openly. Why would we be running this operation in secret?
Well, the reason why it's hidden is because it's going to be a preemptive strike. Right now, what we're seeing is the Saudi-backed coalition forces waging war on Yemen with military and logistical support from US and from the UK government. But what we're going to see now form and come to existence in the near future is a NATO-like alliance, which is going to include direct military intervention by NATO-like forces, which is going to consist of UK and British troops. And what they're going to do, as I mentioned, is they're going to work with the coalition forces, and they're actually going to intervene militarily directly. And they want to do this from all corners of Yemen. We're talking about from the province of Al-Hudaydah, from Al-Mahra, from the province of Marib, from the southern provinces controlled by the coalition forces. They need to do this because that's the only way they can bring Yemen back into the folds of the Saudi shackles and Western supervision. They've lost the war on the ground so far. So now Saudi Arabia and the UAE, they need to call their big daddy, and they need to get them involved in the war in order to put together a coalition force that will attempt to retake Yemen and bring it back to the Western Saudi-backed Hadi government. So make no mistake about it, George. There's going to be a NATO-like alliance formed and created to attack Yemen in order to maintain Western interests over Yemeni land, and again, in order to bring the Hadi-backed government back into power. And they need all military preparations to do this because, as we have seen on the ground, they've lost across the board. So this is what's happening right now with the U.S. Military activities happening around the Red Sea. This is actually a strategic way for the U.S. to send a warning to Ansar Allah that if Ansar Allah does not come to terms, and if Ansar Allah does not agree to a U.S. friendly backed peace initiative, as Saudi Arabia proposed a couple of months ago, then the U.S. will be forced to intervene in Yemen militarily from land, air, and sea if the Houthis don't agree to a deal that secures U.S. interests over Yemen, if the Houthis don't agree to a deal that somehow, some way restores the Hadi-backed government into power in Yemen. So this is something that I believe is going to happen in the future, and we see the preparations taking place today.
Is it likely that only British troops are operating in Yemen in this way, or perhaps more likely that other countries also were doing so?
Well, we're talking about British troops existing on the ground. We're talking about U.S. soldiers on Yemeni soil. We're talking about UAE. We're talking about, of course, Saudi troops on the ground. Pretty soon there's going to be French and German troops in Yemen. Like I said, this is going to be, they're on the verge of forming this NATO-like alliance consisting of Western nations who will directly wage war on Yemen. And the reason why they want to do this, and they need to do this sooner rather than later, is because they want to prevent the Sana'a-backed government, the Ansarullah-backed government, from building a strong military air defense system. So they need to act now, and this is why we see these preparations taking place. The Saudi Arabia and the coalition forces, along with their Western allies, they would prefer to wage an all-out war on the Houthis, aka Ansarullah, now rather than later, because they haven't won anything politically. They haven't forced Ansarullah to compromise on a peace deal that the U.S. approves of, and for that reason alone, they have to try to gain momentum and try to gain leverage and an upper hand militarily. And in order for that to happen, Western troops have to get involved and rescue and aid their Arab-backed coalition forces who have failed across the board in this war since 2015.
Yusuf, for how long do you think the British or any other country similarly engaged can possibly keep that engagement, that involvement, a secret?
I don't think it's a secret anymore. The U.S. ambassador to Yemen has acknowledged that has acknowledged and confirmed that U.S. or British troops are on the ground in Al Mahra district, and the reason he claims is because this was in response to the request of the Hadi-backed government in order to counter, quote unquote, terrorism. If they really wanted to counter terrorism, what about the terrorism that's happening on a mass scale from states like Saudi Arabia and the UAE, who have bombed Yemen almost every province? They've bombed and killed innocent children in hospitals. They've bombed and killed innocent children on a bus on their way to school. That's the biggest type of terrorism that the Yemeni people are witnessing. So if the British ambassador to Yemen is claiming that the existence of British troops in Al Mahra is to counter terrorism, when you look at how Yemenis are viewing the conflict, they view the UK troops as the biggest aggressors and the ones who are committing acts of terrorism by supporting the Saudi-backed regime with military supplies and military equipment that kill innocent Yemeni children. And this is why the war has continued since for 7 years, because of the support of the UK government and because of the support from the US government to Saudi Arabia and the coalition forces, who have the only thing they've really succeeded in is killing innocent people and starving people by imposing a economic blockade on Yemen that's preventing humanitarian aid and vital supplies from entering the country.
Bob, all-out war, total war, what could possibly go wrong?
Well, all wars are wrong, to be fair, but ultimately, NATO is not about to invade Yemen in the slightest, or a coalition of that nature. It's not about us invading them and doing a ground war. At the end of the day, forces that also belong to NATO are also eligible to put themselves up for a UN tour. And ultimately, the UN wants to intervene on the humanitarian side of things. Building military bases makes perfect sense, not necessarily for aggressive action to invade anywhere, but because you need a huge amount of logistic support to bring in rations.
And you can always leave them behind in the middle of the night, like the US has just done in Afghanistan.
Yes, absolutely. You can use them as they are basically an inroad and outroad out of the country. You need to keep them out of the way. They're not necessarily an offensive thing. They're just a base. You need it to be able to bring people in for peacekeeping UN forces. But the armies of the UN forces are the same ones that are in NATO as they are from around the globe. So there's not about to be some huge invasion, not from NATO anyway, certainly. I'd say that.
Hugh, here's a conundrum. President Biden made hardly any electoral commitments during his campaign. One of the very few that he did was to disengage from this war in Yemen and to put distance between the US administration and the frankly criminal administration in Saudi Arabia. Was that just a pre-election promise to be broken, or is something going on here?
Well, I think something is going on here. Politicians make lots of promises when they're on the hustings. As I said earlier, Trump and Mike Pompeo designated the Houthis a terrorist organization in January of this year, and Biden turned that around fairly promptly, took them off that list. Not that that list is a meaningful thing to start with. And the difficulty, of course, is if you stop selling smart bombs to the Saudis, they just go back to using the unsmart bombs, which kill even more civilians. And that's one of the problems. I mean, I thought what Yusuf was saying was obviously very informed, and respect to him for his knowledge and his eloquence. I mean, I'm not sure that I would necessarily see the ramping up of a Western invasion of Yemen as being a very distinct or immediate possibility, simply because I think the perpetrators of these war crimes, and they are war crimes, let's be honest, I think they are already beginning to see the error of their ways. That's not to say they're going to come to the negotiation table anytime soon, but in 2019, Mohammed bin Zayed, the de facto leader of the UAE, he sort of pulled back from UAE doing what it was doing to assist the Saudis. And I think even kind of his friend Mohammed bin Salman, you know, in the wake of the Khashoggi outrage, there has been a kind of sense in which, interestingly, in the last 6 months, MBS has started to talk to the Houthis and about the need for negotiation. Obviously, that's cynical, but it's a sign that neither the Saudis nor the Emiratis see this ending well. And then, of course, you have Biden, we've just been talking about, who, whether or not he's going to put his money where his mouth is talking about kind of going in a more peaceful direction. So we're in a kind of intriguing, paradoxical situation post-Brexit of having the Yemen quad of killers hanging up their guns, all of them except for one, and that's the British government.
It is whether to go on or. Is it bloodier to go on or to go back? Not reinforcing failure was always, I understood, a military principle. This war is a failure. Why would we reinforce it?
Well, in a sense, we wouldn't reinforce it. Ultimately, as Hugh and Sarah quite rightly said, you know, it's the tribal politics of Yemen is very complex. You know, as it was the president himself, Saleh, who often said, you know, governing Yemen was like dancing on the heads of snakes. At the end of the day, it's an incredibly complex place. It's not black and white. You're not always look at Afghanistan, Iraq, and the results there as well. It's the same sort of thing.